All right, let's dive in. Today, we're tackling Chemtrails Exposed by Peter A. Kirby. This book dives into the world of, well, chemtrails. And we're going to see if this new Manhattan Project he talks about is really a thing.
Yeah, it's a wild ride for sure. It connects all these events and ideas, into this story about a massive operation to control the weather.
Definitely a bold claim. Right from the start, Kirby separates chemtrails from regular contrails.
Right.
He says chemtrails hang around longer and spread out, creating those weird, hazy clouds we sometimes see. He even says that just because the Oxford Dictionary now includes chemtrail doesn't mean they aren't real.
He's definitely pushing back against the mainstream narrative there. And he doesn't stop there. He says these chemtrails are full of aluminum, barium, and strontium. He even points to tests of rainwater samples.
Interesting.
But the big question is, why?
Yeah, why would anyone do this? I mean, is there really a new Manhattan Project happening right above us?
Yeah.
A secret operation that big would be insane.
It would be huge. And Kirby explores a bunch of possible reasons, each one scarier than the last. Like using weather as a weapon, or even controlling it to make money.
Like with those weather derivatives.
Exactly.
So someone could get rich by betting on a hurricane, and then maybe even use this technology to make it happen.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought. And Kirby digs into the history of weather derivatives, especially Enron's role, showing how manipulating the weather for profit could be a powerful motive.
Okay, I can see how the profit motive could be a big factor. But is there anything in history that shows this kind of large-scale weather control?
Well, Kirby highlights that governments and scientists have been interested in weather modification for over a century.
Yeah.
He even mentions Clouds of Secrecy, a book by Dr. Leonard Cole. It documents the military's own experiments with spraying chemicals and biological stuff into the atmosphere.
So there's been some experimenting, but on a much smaller scale, right?
Yeah.
What makes Kirby think this new Manhattan Project is so much bigger?
He says the spraying is happening way too often and in way too many places, based on what people around the world are reporting. He thinks it would take a whole fleet of special planes, not just regular commercial flights. We're talking modified jumbo jets with spraying equipment and atmospheric monitoring, the whole works.
A secret fleet of chemtrail planes. Sounds like something straight out of a movie. How could something like that stay hidden for so long?
Kirby tackles that head on. He compares it to secret aircraft operations in the past, like the Flying Tigers and Air America. They had tons of planes operating in secret, and he suggests similar tactics could be used to hide the chemtrail fleet.
That's kind of unsettling. But let's say, just for argument's sake, that this fleet exists. Who's calling the shots? Who's behind this whole new Manhattan Project?
He points the finger at the CIA. He claims they're running a huge disinformation campaign to keep the whole thing under wraps. He even suggests that the idea of man-made global warming is a deliberate lie, a distraction from the real cause of climate change, chemtrails.
Wait, hold on. Is he saying global warming is a hoax? That the climate change we're seeing is actually because of chemtrails?
That's the gist of his argument. He sees it as a cover story orchestrated by the CIA to protect the new Manhattan Project and its real goals.
Wow, that's a bold claim. So if the CIA is behind this, why would they do it? What's their motive?
Kirby suggests a few reasons, from keeping military dominance to controlling resources around the world. But maybe the most disturbing claim is the link to a possible depopulation agenda.
A depopulation agenda?
Yeah.
Seriously? Is he saying someone's trying to wipe out part of the world's population with chemtrails?
That's where we'll pick up in part 2 of our deep dive. We'll unpack that controversial claim and see if Kirby has any evidence to back it up. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Chemtrails Exposed. Last time, things got pretty wild. And this time, we're going even deeper into one of the most unsettling parts of the book, this connection between chemtrails and a depopulation agenda.
Yeah, that's definitely the most controversial part. Kirby brings up figures like John Holdren and Bill Gates, who are known for advocating population control.
Right. Holdren's book, Ecoscience, had some pretty out there ideas.
Yeah.
But does Kirby actually link them directly to this new Manhattan Project?
Not really, no. He mostly focuses on the fact that they've publicly supported population control measures as a solution to global problems. It's like he's implying that anyone who believes in population control is automatically part of this massive spraying program.
That seems like a bit of a stretch. Just because someone thinks we need to manage population growth doesn't mean they're okay with spraying chemicals into the atmosphere.
Exactly. There's a big difference between supporting population control in theory and actually supporting potentially harmful secret methods to do it. And Kirby's book kind of mixes those two things up.
Okay, so let's say, just for argument's sake, that there is a depopulation agenda. How does weather manipulation fit into all of this? How could spraying stuff into the sky actually reduce the population?
Well, Kirby says that the aluminum, barium, and strontium in these chemtrails could be really bad for our health and the environment. He suggests that the respiratory illnesses, neurological problems, and damage to ecosystems that he links to chemtrails are all intentional.
Wait a second. Is he saying that people are being deliberately hurt or even killed by these chemtrails to control the population?
That's kind of what he's implying, yeah. But it's important to remember that this is all speculation on Kirby's part. He doesn't have any solid scientific proof to back up these claims.
So it's more conjecture than hard evidence. Are there any studies out there that link these elements to the specific health problems he talks about?
Not really. We know these elements can be toxic in certain forms and amounts, but there's no scientific agreement that they're causing widespread health issues like Kirby describes.
Yeah.
He relies a lot on anecdotal evidence and online reports, which aren't as reliable as peer-reviewed studies.
Okay, so we should take those claims with a grain of salt.
All right.
What about his assertion that the CIA is covering up the truth about chemtrails?
Now, this is where things get interesting. Kirby paints a picture of the CIA as this master manipulator, controlling the media, hiding evidence, keeping the public in the dark about this new Manhattan Project. He even claims that man-made global warming is a CIA fabrication, something they made up to distract us from the real cause of climate change, which he says is chemtrails.
So he's not just saying chemtrails are real, he's saying they're the main cause of climate change, and that the whole global warming story is a lie.
Yeah, that's basically his argument. He sees it all as one giant disinformation campaign run by the CIA to protect the new Manhattan Project and its true goals, which he believes include population control.
Wow. Okay, so we've got some pretty wild theories here. But how does he think they're actually doing all of this? Where's all the money and resources for a project this big coming from?
That's where Kirby brings back the idea of weather derivatives, which we talked about earlier. He says that the potential for making huge profits from manipulating the weather creates a really strong incentive for those behind the spraying. He suggests that some people or organizations could be making money from extreme weather events that they're creating themselves through chemtrails.
You mean like intentionally creating hurricanes, droughts, and floods just to cash in on weather derivatives? That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and it kind of plays into this bigger theme in the book about corporate greed and unchecked power. Kirby sees the New Manhattan Project as a sign of a system where profit and control are more important than ethics and the well-being of the planet and people.
I see. That's definitely something to think about. But going back to his evidence, does he have anything more than speculation and circumstantial evidence to support these claims about weather manipulation for profit?
Not really. He uses the history of Enron and their involvement with weather derivatives as an example of how things could be corrupt and manipulated, but he doesn't actually prove that this is happening on a large scale with chemtrails.
So he's making connections and telling a compelling story, but the foundation of it all still seems pretty shaky. It's a lot of what-ifs and maybes.
You're right, and that's why it's so important for us to be critical thinkers and look at these claims with a healthy dose of skepticism. It's easy to get caught up in the mystery and fear, but we need to demand evidence, not just speculation.
That's a good point. So where do we go from here? We've covered a lot, but we've also raised a lot of questions.
In the final part of our deep dive, we'll dig into those questions a little deeper. We'll explore what Kirby's theories could mean for the world. We'll look at the potential consequences of unchecked power and secrecy. And we'll think about what it all means for us as individuals trying to make sense of a world full of complex information and conflicting stories.
Sounds like an interesting discussion. I'm looking forward to it. See you in part 3. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into Peter Kirby's Chemtrails Exposed. We've gone through some pretty wild claims, from secret chemtrail fleets to a possible depopulation agenda.
It's been a journey, that's for sure. Now I think it's time to step back and consider the bigger picture. Even if we're not totally convinced by Kirby's theories, he does bring up some crucial points about power, secrecy, and how technology can be misused.
Absolutely. Even if we take those extreme claims with a grain of salt, there's still this unsettling feeling, this idea that there might be powerful groups operating behind the scenes, maybe manipulating the environment, impacting our health. It's definitely disturbing.
It really makes you question our own autonomy and control over our lives. If something like the New Manhattan Project is actually happening, it means decisions with huge consequences are being made without the public knowing or agreeing.
That's a pretty scary thought. It makes you feel kind of powerless. Like, what can we even do as individuals? We're talking about powerful institutions. Maybe even the CIA. It feels like a David and Goliath situation.
I get that feeling of helplessness, definitely. But that's exactly why critical thinking is so important. We can't just accept these claims without question, but we also can't just dismiss them blindly. We need to be informed citizens, able to evaluate evidence, question what we're told, and hold those in power accountable.
So it's not about giving in to fear or paranoia. It's about being informed and engaged. But where do we even start? There's so much information out there, it's tough to know what's real and what's not.
It's a real challenge. But I think a good first step is to check out the sources Kirby uses in his book. He cites a lot of scientific papers, patents, and government documents. We can go back to those original sources and see if his interpretation holds up.
That's a good point, doing our own research instead of just relying on someone else's take.
Exactly. And if we're worried about the possibility of environmental manipulation, we can also look into the history of weather modification and geoengineering. There's a lot of info out there from trustworthy scientific organizations. We can learn about the science, the potential risks and benefits, the ethical side of it all.
So it's about empowering ourselves with knowledge, not letting fear take over.
Exactly. And remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand these complex issues, the better we can have informed discussions, make responsible choices, and hold those in power accountable.
That's a really powerful message. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Chemtrails Exposed, what's the main takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to approach these kinds of claims with a critical but open mind. Don't be afraid to question things, do your research, and come to your own conclusions. And remember, even if you disagree with Kirby's conclusions, his book raises some really important questions about transparency, accountability, and using technology responsibly. These are questions we should all be thinking about, regardless of what we believe about chemtrails.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into conspiracy theory, science, and critical thinking. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and stay informed.